Let's talk about the Blizzard sisters, because every time they're on screen together, it's a masterclass in how combat power is just the most visible symptom of a deep emotional wound. The debate between Tatsumaki and Fubuki isn't really about who's stronger in a straight-up psychic duel, we all know the answer there, but about understanding why that power gap exists and what it does to both of them, twisting their identities into something neither fully controls. It's a family drama written in the language of psychic shockwaves and crushed city blocks, where every technique is a coping mechanism, and every victory feels a bit like a loss. To compare them is to dissect a single trauma from two completely opposite angles, one calcified into an unbreakable fortress, the other desperately trying to build an empire to hide behind. Starting with power is the obvious move, but the obvious is a trap. Tatsumaki's power isn't just immense, it's total, a perfect expression of an unyielding will. It's not about lifting bigger rocks, it's about the absolute control she exerts over her environment, a psychic manifestation of her need to never ever be vulnerable or constrained again. Her mentality in a fight is pure, unadulterated dominance. She doesn't just defeat monsters, she erases them, often while monologuing about how weak and pathetic they are. This isn't just arrogance, it's a psychological imperative. Her confidence is a suit of armor forged in a furnace of childhood exploitation and isolation. She believes, with every fiber of her being, that reliance on anyone is the first step toward being controlled, so her power must be self-contained, overwhelming, and immediate. There is no battle IQ in the traditional sense because she rarely needs a plan. Her strategy is application of force until the problem ceases to exist. Her restraint is virtually zero, and that's her greatest psychological vulnerability in a way. Her first and only solution is maximum power, which leaves her emotionally unequipped for problems that can't be solved by crushing them. When she's challenged, she doesn't adapt tactically so much as she just pushes harder, a direct reflection of her stubborn defensive psychology. Her growth isn't about learning new techniques. Her telekinesis is already ludicrously versatile, from creating barriers to manipulating the very ground beneath her, but about the painfully slow, reluctant chipping away at her walls, learning that allowing someone to stand beside you isn't the same as letting them put a collar on you. Now, look at Fubuki. Her power, while formidable, is defined by its limits, and her entire identity has been built in the shadow of that fact. She cannot compete with her sister's raw, planet-shaking might, so she has constructed a world where that raw might isn't the only currency that matters. This is where the comparison gets fascinating. Fubuki's combat ability is almost entirely strategic. She's a tactician, a leader, a psychic coordinator. Her signature move isn't a devastating blast, but the formation of a psychic network with her Blizzard group, synergizing their abilities. Her intelligence isn't just raw psychic calculation, it's social and political intelligence. She understands hierarchy, perception, and the power of organization. Her battle IQ is high because it has to be. She's constantly fighting from a perceived position of weakness, so she must use terrain, teamwork, and timing to overcome opponents who might outclass her individually. Her confidence is a carefully maintained performance, a beauty and style persona she projects to mask a deep-seated insecurity and a terrifying fear of being insignificant, of being left behind as utterly powerless. Her restraint is often calculated, a tool for assessment, but it can tip over into hesitation because she's so acutely aware of what's at stake, not just the fight, but her standing, her carefully built empire of followers that prove she matters. Her weakness isn't a low power level, it's the psychological weight of comparison, the tornado of terror's little sister, complex that can paralyze her initiative or push her into reckless challenges to prove a point. Their personalities are their fighting styles, and their fighting styles are their trauma responses. Tatsumaki's isolation isn't a preference, it's a doctrine. Her emotional depth is buried under layers of psychic defense, manifesting as abrasive condescension and a fierce, if twisted, protectiveness over Fubuki that she expresses through domination. I'm strong, so I'll handle everything. You stay safe and weak over there. She responds to responsibility by shouldering it alone, to loss by vowing to never be hurt again, to success with a cold, of course. Fubuki, conversely, responds to the same childhood trauma with a desperate need for connection and validation. Her leadership of the Blizzard group is a direct contradiction to Tatsumaki's solitude. It's a defense mechanism, a fortress built of people. If she can't be the strongest individual, she will be the most influential leader. Her morality is more nuanced, She plays political games, strong-arms weaker heroes into her faction, but also shows a genuine, if initially self-serving, protective streak toward her members. Her growth is about unlearning this transactional view of strength and relationships, about finding a confidence that comes from within her own evolving power, rather than from the number of subordinates she commands. While Tatsumaki must learn to open her hand, Fubuki must learn to stand firmly on her own 2 feet without her human crutch. Think about how they handle psychological pressure. For Tatsumaki, pressure is an insult. It's a trigger that sends her straight into a rage, unleashing even more devastating power to obliterate the source of her irritation. Her psychological handling is binary: suppress or destroy. When her dominance is threatened, she doubles down, because the alternative, acknowledging a genuine threat, is psychologically unacceptable. It ties back to that core fear of being controlled. For Fubuki, pressure is an ever-present reality. She handles it through preparation, alliances, and sometimes bluffing. But when faced with a truly hopeless situation, one where her strategies crumble and she's alone, that's when her sister's shadow looms largest and her confidence can shatter. Yet, it's also in these moments where her most genuine growth occurs, when she's stripped of her social armor and has to decide who she is without her group or her sister's reputation to hide behind. From a narrative perspective, they represent 2 flawed answers to the same question of power and security. Tatsumaki symbolizes the ideal of absolute solitary strength. She is the pinnacle that the Hero Association craves, a one-woman strategic weapon. The story frames her as both awe-inspiring and deeply tragic. Her power is a reward for surviving horror, but it's also the cage that keeps her from human connection. The narrative limits her not in power, but in happiness. Fubuki, on the other hand, symbolizes the quest for strength through community and cleverness in a system that glorifies individual might. She represents the ambitious, climbing class of heroes for whom S-Class is a distant dream. The story frames her as savvy but misguided, initially using people as tools in her climb, only to slowly learn that real strength can be collaborative. The narrative rewards her with genuine bonds and a sense of self-worth that slowly divorces from her sister's shadow. So, in a direct confrontation, who dominates? Psychologically and physically, Tatsumaki every time. A serious Tatsumaki views Fubuki not as a rival, but as a misbehaving child to be scolded and immobilized. Fubuki's techniques, her strategies, her networked attacks would be brushed aside like gnats because Tatsumaki operates on a completely different ontological level of power. Fubuki's greatest weapon, her mind and her ability to coordinate, is useless against an entity that rejects the very premise of a fair fight or a battle of attrition. Tatsumaki wins by changing the rules of gravity itself, but to leave it there is to miss the entire point. The real question is, in what situation could Fubuki not win, but endure? Where could she not dominate, but force a different outcome? The answer lies in their emotional battlefield. When the conflict shifts from raw power to a battle of wills over ideology, Fubuki gains a foothold. Her stubborn refusal to be cowed, to live in her sister's isolated world, is a form of resistance Tatsumaki's telekinesis cannot crush. In moments where Fubuki stands her ground for the sake of her own found family, protecting someone not because she's stronger, but because it's right, she momentarily escapes the comparison. She fights with a different currency, one Tatsumaki doesn't understand. In that scenario, Tatsumaki might win the psychic clash, but she'd lose the argument, facing a defiance she can't physically suppress, which for her is a unique and troubling form of struggle. Ultimately, their conflict is a loop waiting to be broken. Tatsumaki, for all her world-ending power, is stuck in the past, using that power to wall off the world that hurt her. Fubuki, for all her strategizing and empire building, is running from a shadow, trying to build a throne high enough to finally look her sister in the eye. One is defined by a power so great it became a prison. The other is defined by the lack of that same power, which forced her to develop a different kind of strength altogether. The debate isn't about who would win in a fight, it's about which path to security and identity you find more relatable, the impenetrable fortress or the well-defended city. And watching them, you start to realize the true victory for either won't come from defeating the other, but from the day Tatsumaki learns she can lower her barrier without breaking, and the day Fubuki realizes she was never truly in the shadow to begin with, just standing in a different, self-made light.